September 1940. Berlin-Kreuzberg. Klaus Becker stood in line with 43 other boys outside the district assembly hall, trying not to cry. He was 10 years old. His mother had scrubbed his face raw that morning, combed his hair with water until it lay flat against his skull. His father hadn't said goodbye. The boy in front of him was shaking. "What if they hit us?" the boy whispered. "They won't." Klaus lied. He'd heard stories. Older boys came back from the first meetings with bruises, with split lips, with something broken behind their eyes. The doors opened. A man in a brown uniform stepped out, his voice like gravel. "Inside. Now. Single file." Klaus's legs moved before his brain caught up. At the front stood Scharführer Erich Zimmermann, 22 years old, missing 2 fingers on his left hand, eyes like a dog that had been beaten too many times. "Sit." They sat. Zimmermann walked between the rows, slow, deliberate. He stopped behind Klaus. "You. Stand up." Klaus stood. His knees locked. "What's your name?" "Klaus Becker, sir." "Louder." "Klaus Becker, sir." Zimmermann circled him. "Your father works at Borsig, doesn't he? Building locomotives for the front?" "Yes, sir." "Good. That's real work." He raised his voice. "Your fathers build the machines of war. You will become those machines. You are not children anymore. Children are weak. Children cry. Children disobey. Are you children?" Silence. "I asked you a question. Are you children?" "No, sir." The response was ragged, terrified. "No, you are soldiers. You are the future of the Reich, and soldiers do not cry. Soldiers do not question. Soldiers obey." He moved to the front, his damaged hand gripping the table. "If you cry in my presence, I will give you something to cry about. If you hesitate when given an order, I will correct you. If you fail, you will be punished. Do you understand?" "Yes, sir." Klaus understood. Childhood had ended the moment he walked through that door. November 1940. The first lesson. They learned to march. 3 hours every Saturday, boots hammering cobblestones in perfect rhythm. Klaus's feet blistered. When he stumbled, Zimmermann made him run laps until he vomited. "Again," Zimmermann said. Klaus ran. They learned songs, violent songs about blood and soil and enemies that needed crushing. The boy next to him, Peter Vogel, couldn't remember the words. Zimmermann grabbed him by the collar, dragged him to the front. "This boy has failed the unit. When one fails, all fail. Form 2 lines." They formed lines facing each other. Zimmermann handed Peter to the boy at the front. "Hit him." The boy hesitated. "I said hit him." The fist connected with Peter's jaw. His head snapped back. He didn't fall. "Next." The second boy hit him in the stomach. Peter doubled over, gasping. "Next." It went down the line. 12 boys. 12 hits. When Klaus's turn came, Peter's face was already swelling, blood leaking from his nose. His eyes met Klaus's, pleading. "Hit him," Zimmermann said, "or you take his place." Klaus hit him, not hard. A glancing blow to the shoulder, but he hit him. Peter collapsed after the 20th blow. Zimmermann stepped over him. "Dismissed. Vogel, you stay." They left Peter there, curled on the floor. Klaus walked home in silence, his knuckles aching. When he reached his apartment, his mother asked how the meeting went. "Fine," Klaus said. That night he pressed his face into his pillow and cried as quietly as he could. January 1941. The Indoctrination. The film projector clattered in the darkness. Der ewige Jude, the eternal Jew. The narrator's voice was calm, clinical, explaining how Jewish people were parasites, how they spread disease, how they controlled everything. The images showed crowded ghettos, poverty rats. The editing was seamless, deliberate. It made you believe. Klaus watched a boy on screen steal bread. The narrator called him a thief. Klaus felt disgust rise in his throat. Not because of the theft, but because he was supposed to feel it. Because the film was teaching him what to feel. When the lights came on, Zimmerman stood at the front. "What did you learn?" Hands shot up. "You Schmidt?" A boy with red hair stood. "That Jews are the enemy, sir." "Correct." "You Hartman?" "That they're not like us, sir." "Correct." Zimmerman's gaze swept the room. "The Jew is the enemy within. The Bolshevik is the enemy without. The American is the enemy from across the sea. They all want the same thing: to destroy Germany, to enslave our people, to erase everything we are. Do you believe this?" "Yes, sir." Klaus said it too. He said it because everyone else said it. He said it because he was 10 years old and didn't know how to say no. June 1942, the American films. The newsreel showed American soldiers in North Africa. The narrator said they'd executed 20 German prisoners after they surrendered. The footage was grainy. You couldn't see faces, but you could see bodies falling, muzzle flashes. "These are the Americans," Zimmerman said. "They pretend to be civilized. They pretend to follow the rules of war. But when no one is watching, they murder prisoners. They torture wounded men. They burn villages and rape women." The boy next to Klaus Franz Müller raised his hand. "Yes." "Is it true, sir?" Zimmerman's face darkened. "Are you questioning what you just saw?" "No, sir, I just—" "Stand up." Franz stood trembling. "Do you think the Reich lies to you?" "No, sir." "Do you think your eyes lie to you?" "No, sir." "Then what are you asking?" Franz's voice broke. "Nothing, sir. I'm sorry, sir." "Sit down." Franz sat. Klaus kept his eyes on the screen, on the images of faceless American soldiers committing faceless atrocities. He believed, because what else could he do? After the film, Klaus walked home with Franz through the rubble of a recent bombing raid. British, probably. The buildings on Oranienstrasse were gutted. "Do you think it's true?" Franz asked quietly. Klaus glanced around. What they said about the Americans." Klaus shrugged. "Why would they lie?" "I don't know. My uncle lived in America before the war. He said they weren't monsters." "Where's your uncle now?" Franz didn't answer. They walked the rest of the way in silence. April 12, 1945. The letter. Klaus was 15 when the conscription notice arrived. A single sheet of brown paper stamped with the SS insignia. His mother opened it at the kitchen table while Klaus ate a slice of bread so thin he could see through it. Her hands started shaking. "No," she whispered. "No, no, no." Klaus took the paper from her. "You are hereby ordered to report to the Kreuzberg District Assembly Hall at 0800 hours on April 13, 1945 for service in the Volkssturm. Failure to report is punishable by death." His father sat across the table, wooden prosthetic leg propped against the wall. Werner Becker hadn't spoken in 3 days. Now he looked at Klaus. "Don't go," his mother said. "We'll hide you. We'll—" "Hannelore." His father's voice was quiet, final. "If he doesn't go, they'll shoot him in the street. Then we all hide. We go to your sister in Dresden. Dresden is ash." Werner picked up his cane, stood. He limped over to Klaus, placed a hand on his son's shoulder. "Listen to me. You go. You do what they tell you. And when you get the chance, you run. You hear me? You don't be a hero. You don't die for them. You run and you survive." Klaus nodded, but his throat was too tight to speak. His mother covered her face with her hands and wept. April 13, 1945. The training. 64 boys stood in the ruins of a bombed apartment building near Görlitzer Park. The youngest was 12. The oldest was 17. Klaus recognized some of them from the Hitler Youth. Most were strangers. Hauptscharführer Otto Krantz stood before them, 54 years old, leaning on a cane. "You have 3 days. 3 days to learn what soldiers spend months learning. I can't make you soldiers, but I can try to keep you alive long enough to surrender." A boy in the front row raised his hand. "Surrender, sir." Krantz stared at him. "The war is lost. Berlin is surrounded. The Führer is in his bunker and the Reich is collapsing. I'm not supposed to tell you this. I'm supposed to tell you that victory is at hand, that we're turning the tide, that you're heroes defending the fatherland. He spat. You're not heroes. You're children. And the men who sent you here should be hanged. The boys stared in stunned silence. But you're here. And I'm here. So I'm going to teach you how to shoot, how to hide, and how to not get killed. After that, what you do is up to you. They learned to fire the carabiner 98K. Klaus's first shot went wide. His second kicked like a mule. The recoil slammed into his shoulder. Something cracked. Pain shot down his arm. He tasted blood where he'd bitten his tongue. His ears rang so loud, he couldn't hear Krantz shouting at him. Again. Klaus's hands were shaking. He couldn't feel his fingers. He fired. The rifle kicked again. This time he was ready. The pain was still there, but duller. The bullet hit a brick wall 30 meters away. Good enough, someone said. They learned to use the Panzerfaust. Klaus's instructor, a one-eyed corporal named Vogel, demonstrated the weapon with the enthusiasm of a man teaching funeral rites. This is a Panzerfaust 60. You get one shot. Effective range 60 meters. After you fire, throw it away and run. If you don't run, the backblast burns you alive. If you run toward the tank, the machine gun kills you. If you run away and the tank sees you, the machine gun kills you. If you miss, the tank kills you. Questions. A boy raised his hand. What if we hit? Vogel smiled without humor. Then you live long enough to reload. Maybe. Klaus's turn came. He knelt, positioned the tube on his shoulder, aimed at a rusted Volkswagen 50 meters away. His hands were shaking. The trigger was cold. His finger tightened. The explosion was a physical blow. The backblast hit him like a fist. He flew backward, slammed into rubble. His right arm was on fire. Actually on fire. Someone was screaming. It was him. Someone threw dirt on his sleeve. The flames went out. His skin was blistered red, weeping. The rocket had sailed over the car, over the wall, and exploded somewhere in the ruins beyond. Vogel helped him up. You alive? Klaus nodded. He couldn't speak. Good. Now you know what it feels like. There was no next time. They had 3 rockets for 64 boys. April 30th, 1945. The death of the Führer. They were dug in at the Oberbaum Bridge when the news came. A Volkssturm runner covered in brick dust and blood whispered it to Krantz, then disappeared. Krantz gathered them in a bombed-out shop front. 12 boys eating cold soup from dented cans. The Führer is dead. No one spoke. Donitz is in charge now. We keep fighting. Dieter Schultz, the 12-year-old, started crying. Softly at first, then harder, his shoulders shaking. No one told him to stop. Franz, sitting next to Klaus, whispered, "What do we do now?" Klaus didn't know. He'd been raised to believe the Führer was eternal, that Germany was invincible, that defeat was impossible. Now the Führer was dead, Germany was rubble, and defeat was 3 days away. "We fight," Klaus said, "because that's what you were supposed to say." But his voice carried no conviction. That night Klaus couldn't sleep. He sat in his foxhole, staring at the dark water of the Spree. He thought about his father's words. You run and you survive. But where the Soviets were coming from the east, the Americans from the west. Berlin was a trap. He thought about surrendering. But the propaganda screamed in his head. They will torture you. They will mutilate you. Americans are monsters. He gripped his rifle tighter and waited for dawn. May 3rd, 1945. The monsters. Klaus heard the tanks before sunrise. 3 of them diesel engines, growling treads, grinding over broken stone. He pressed himself into his fighting position, Panzerfaust across his knees. Sherman tanks, American. Olive drab white stars painted on the hulls. Behind them, infantry in loose formation. Krantz crouched beside him. Hold your fire. But I said hold. The lead tank stopped 50 meters away. Its turret swiveled. Klaus's finger found the trigger. His heart hammered. A voice crackled over a loudspeaker. German. Broken accented, but German. Junge, komm raus. Wir werden nicht schießen. Boys, come out. We will not shoot. Klaus stared at Krantz. It's a trick. Maybe. The voice repeated. Der Krieg ist vorbei. Ihr seid Kinder. Kommt raus. The war is over. You are children. Come out. Franz stood up, just stood, hands empty, and started walking toward the tank. Franz, stop, Klaus hissed. They'll kill you. But Franz kept walking. 20 meters. 10. He reached the tank and a soldier climbed down. Black skin. American uniform. The soldier pulled a canteen from his belt, opened it, handed it to Franz. Trinken, the soldier said. Franz drank. He didn't collapse. He wasn't shot. He stood there, water running down his chin. One by one the others stood. Dieter, Schmidt, Hartmann, all of them walking toward the Americans with their hands raised. Krantz dropped his rifle. Come on, Klaus. But Klaus couldn't move. 5 years of propaganda. 5 years of fear. His muscles locked. The black soldier saw him. Walked toward him, slow hands visible. Hey, kid, he said in English. It's okay. Nobody's gonna hurt you. Klaus didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. Gentle, tired, human. The soldier knelt, pulled another canteen from his belt, held it out. Trinken. Klaus took it with shaking hands. The water was warm metallic. He drank until the canteen was empty. When he looked up, the soldier was smiling. Not the smile of a conqueror. Not the smile of a monster. The smile of someone who was just relieved he didn't have to shoot a child today. Klaus dropped the Panzerfaust into the dirt. He started crying. Not from fear. Not from relief. From something he didn't have words for yet. The soldier patted his shoulder awkwardly, said something Klaus didn't understand, and walked him toward the other boys. They sat in a ragged line, guarded by Americans who gave them water, who shared cigarettes with Krantz, who looked at them with something close to pity. One soldier, older with sergeant stripes, crouched in front of Klaus. You speak English, kid. Klaus shook his head. The sergeant tried German. Wie alt bist du? 15. Klaus whispered. 15. The sergeant's face darkened. He stood, turned to his men, said something sharp in English. Then he walked away, shaking his head. Klaus sat there, surrounded by other boys, surrounded by American soldiers. Not torture, not death. Just water. Just safety. Just the first moment of peace he'd felt in 5 years. And somewhere in the ruins behind him, the war was ending. Not with a bang. With a black soldier handing a canteen to a boy who'd been taught to hate him. The truck bed was metal cold and packed with 18 boys who still didn't believe they weren't about to die. Klaus sat between Franz and Dieter, knees pulled to his chest, watching American soldiers smoke cigarettes and talk in a language that sounded like gravel rolling downhill. One of them, the black soldier who'd given him water, sat on the tailgate, his rifle across his lap, humming something soft under his breath. Where are they taking us? Dieter whispered. He was 12 and hadn't stopped shaking since they'd climbed into the truck. A camp, Franz said. A prison camp. Will they shoot us there? Klaus didn't answer. He was watching the soldier hum. Monsters didn't hum. Monsters didn't share cigarettes with prisoners. Monsters didn't look tired and sad and human. The truck lurched over rubble. Berlin passed by in ruins. Entire blocks reduced to skeletal walls and ash. They'd done this. Klaus and his Hitler Youth friends, they'd helped make this happen. They'd believed it was glorious. The soldier caught Klaus staring. He smiled, reached into his jacket and pulled out something wrapped in brown paper. He tossed it to Klaus. Hungry, he said in English. Klaus unwrapped it. Bread. White bread, soft with actual butter. He stared at it like it was a hallucination. Eat, the soldier said, gesturing to his mouth. Klaus bit into it. The taste exploded across his tongue. Real bread, real butter. He'd forgotten food could taste like this. Tears ran down his face, and he couldn't stop them. The soldier watched him cry and said something quiet in English. Then he turned away, giving Klaus privacy for his breakdown. They arrived at a temporary holding facility in Spandau at 1100 hours on May 3, 1945. A commandeered factory, red brick walls, still standing windows blown out, surrounded by barbed wire and American guards. Klaus counted 43 soldiers on perimeter duty as they drove through the gate. Every one of them looked exhausted. A sergeant with a clipboard met them at the truck. He was maybe 35 with a thin mustache and eyes that had seen too much. "How many?" he asked. 18, the black soldier said. "Youngest is 12, oldest is 17, Volkssturm. None of them fired a shot." The sergeant looked at the boys in the truck bed like they were something broken he didn't know how to fix. "Jesus Christ, get them processed." Processing meant standing in line in a warehouse that smelled like diesel fuel and disinfectant. An American medic, a Jewish name sewn on his uniform that Klaus couldn't pronounce, checked each boy for wounds, diseases, lice. When he got to Klaus, he paused at the burn on his arm from the Panzerfaust training. "This hurt?" he asked in broken German. Klaus nodded. The medic cleaned it, applied ointment that stung like acid, wrapped it in clean white gauze. "You're lucky," he said. "Another inch and you'd have no arm." "Thank you," Klaus whispered. The medic's hands stopped moving. He looked at Klaus for a long moment. "Don't thank me yet, kid. You're going to live with what you did. That's harder than dying." They were assigned to Barrack 7, a converted warehouse floor, with 50 canvas cots arranged in neat rows. No cells, no bars, just beds and blankets and a single guard at the door who looked more bored than menacing. Klaus chose a cot near the wall. Franz took the one next to him. Dieter took the one next to Franz. They sat in silence waiting for the torture to start. It didn't start. At 1800 hours, dinner arrived. American soldiers wheeled in metal containers on carts. Steam rose from them. The smell made Klaus's stomach cramp. "Line up," a guard said in German. "You eat now." The boys lined up like they'd been trained. Quick, orderly, silent. The guard ladled food onto tin plates. Beans, potatoes, a piece of meat Klaus couldn't identify. Bread, actual bread. Klaus sat on his cot and stared at the plate. This was more food than he'd seen in a month. "Is it poisoned?" someone whispered. An older boy, maybe 16, named Otto, sniffed his food. "They wouldn't poison us. Too much work. They'd just shoot us." But no one was getting shot. The guard stood by the door talking quietly, not even watching them eat. Klaus took a bite. The food was warm, salty, real. He ate slowly, methodically, until the plate was clean. Then he sat there, plate in his lap, and tried to understand what was happening. "They're fattening us up," Otto said, "before they interrogate us." "Interrogate us about what?" Franz asked. "We're children. We don't know anything." "We know things, names, locations, command structures." Klaus doubted they cared about his knowledge of Scharführer Zimmermann's preferred marching cadence. That night, lying on a real mattress under a real blanket, Klaus couldn't sleep. Around him, other boys whispered in the dark. "My father told me Americans cut off fingers. My brother said they burn prisoners alive. I heard they feed you to dogs." Klaus listened to the lies echo in the darkness and said nothing. He'd been fed. He'd been bandaged. He'd been given a bed. None of this matched what he'd been taught. On the third day, a new group arrived. 26 boys from a different Volkssturm unit captured near Tempelhof. They were in worse shape. Starving, some wounded, all terrified. Klaus watched American medics treat them with the same clinical efficiency. Bandages, food, water, no violence. One of the new boys, a kid with a shaved head and hollow eyes, sat next to Klaus during dinner. "I'm Martin," he said. "Klaus. How long have you been here?" 3 days. Have they done anything? Klaus knew what he meant. No, they just feed us and leave us alone. Martin stared at his plate. I don't understand. We were told. I know what we were told, Klaus interrupted. It was all lies. Martin looked at him like he'd blasphemed. Then he started crying quietly into his beans. On May 7, 1945, Germany surrendered unconditionally. The news came over a radio in the guard station loud enough for the boys to hear. A voice speaking German announced that Grand Admiral Dönitz had signed the surrender documents. The war was over. The barracks went silent. Then Otto stood up and started screaming. Traitors, cowards! The Führer would never... A guard opened the door. Sit down. Otto kept screaming. We should have fought to the last man. We should have... The guard walked over, grabbed Otto by the arm, and dragged him out. The door slammed shut. Everyone waited for the gunshot. It never came. 30 minutes later, Otto returned. His face was red, his eyes puffy. He sat on his cot and didn't say another word for 2 days. Klaus asked the guard what happened. We gave him water and let him yell himself out, the guard said in careful German. Kid needed to scream. Can't blame him for that. On May 10th, they were transferred to a larger facility near Rhine, about 450 kilometers northwest of Berlin. The journey took 14 hours in the back of a covered truck, bouncing over roads cratered by bombs. Klaus sat next to a window gap and watched Germany roll by. Burned villages, destroyed bridges, columns of refugees walking with everything they owned on their backs. This was victory. This was what they'd been fighting for. Rhine, prisoner of war enclosure number 4, held approximately 3,200 German prisoners when Klaus arrived. Most were Wehrmacht regulars, Luftwaffe ground crew, a few SS who kept to themselves in a separate compound. The boys, about 140 of them now, were housed in their own section. Tents mostly arranged in orderly rows, surrounded by barbed wire and guard towers. Klaus expected brutality. He got routine. Wake up at 0600, roll call, breakfast, work details mostly cleaning, organizing supplies, moving equipment. Lunch, more work or education classes. Dinner, free time. Lights out at 2200. The food was consistent. Not great, but consistent. Beans, potatoes, bread, occasionally meat. Coffee in the morning, water throughout the day. Klaus gained 7 pounds in 3 weeks. The guards were firm, but not cruel. They enforced rules, they didn't abuse power. When a boy named Friedrich tried to escape on May 18th, they caught him within an hour. Klaus waited for the execution. Instead, they put Friedrich in solitary confinement for 3 days, then returned him to the barracks with extra work detail. Why didn't they shoot me? Friedrich asked Klaus one night. Because they're not what we were told, Klaus said. The education classes started on May 24th. An American officer, Captain Robert Harmon, stood in front of 60 boys and spoke in careful textbook German. You have been lied to, he said. For years you have been taught that Germany is superior, that other races are inferior, that war is glorious. These are lies. I'm going to show you the truth. He showed them photographs. Concentration camps, Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, rows of skeletal corpses, mass graves, gas chambers disguised as showers. This, Captain Harmon said, is what you fought for. This is what your Reich built. This is what happened while you were learning to march. Klaus stared at the photographs and felt his stomach turn inside out. He ran outside and vomited behind the barracks. Franz found him there, sitting in the dirt, shaking. Did you know? Franz asked. No. Klaus wiped his mouth. Did you? No. But my uncle, the one who went to America? They arrested him in 1938. I asked my father where he went. He said away, just away. Franz sat down next to Klaus. Do you think? I don't know. They sat in silence for a long time. That night, Otto stood up during free time and addressed the barracks. "They're lying to us," he said. "Those photographs are fake. American propaganda. They want to make us hate ourselves, make us weak so they can control us." "Sit down," Klaus said. "No, we need to remember who we are. We need to—" Klaus stood up. "We need to remember what we saw. Those photographs were real." "You don't know that." "Yes, I do." Klaus's voice was shaking. "Because it makes sense. Everything they told us was a lie. Why would they stop lying about this?" Otto's face went red. "You're a traitor." "I'm not a traitor. I'm just done being stupid." Otto lunged at him. Klaus caught his fist twisted and threw him to the ground. 5 years of Hitler Youth training kicking in. Otto tried to get up. Klaus pinned him. A guard opened the door. "What's happening?" "Nothing," Klaus said. He let Otto up. "We're done." Otto glared at him, then walked away. Half the boys followed Otto. Half stayed with Klaus. The barracks split down the middle that night. On June 3rd, Klaus met Sergeant James Walker properly for the first time. Walker was the black soldier who'd given him water on May 3rd. He was 28 years old from Chicago and spoke exactly 4 words of German water food, sleep and toilet. Walker was assigned to guard duty at the education tent where Klaus was learning English. The lessons were basic, taught by a corporal from Ohio who'd been a schoolteacher before the war. Klaus was good at it. Languages came easy. During a break, Walker approached him. "You're the kid from Kreuzberg," Walker said in English. Klaus understood maybe half of it. "Yes, Klaus." "James." Walker held out his hand. Klaus shook it. Walker's grip was firm, but not crushing. "You doing okay?" Klaus didn't know the English words for what he was feeling. "Thank you for water." Walker nodded. "You're welcome, kid." He pulled out a chocolate bar, broke it in half, offered 1 piece to Klaus. "Hershey's. Best thing America makes besides jazz." Klaus had never heard of jazz. He took the chocolate bit into it and tasted something that felt like hope dissolving on his tongue. "Good?" Walker asked. "Good," Klaus agreed. They sat in silence for a while. Then Klaus, in his broken English, asked, "Why? You help we bad." Walker was quiet for a long time. "You're not bad. You're a kid who got used. That's different." He looked at Klaus. "My son is 10. He's back home in Chicago. When I look at you, I see him. I see what could happen if the wrong people got to him first." He took a bite of chocolate. "So I help, because maybe someone would help him if he needed it." Klaus didn't have the words to respond, so he just sat there eating chocolate next to a man he'd been taught to hate and felt something inside him start to heal. On June 15th, letters arrived. The Red Cross had finally established communication lines. Klaus's mother had written. The letter was 3 weeks old, forwarded through multiple channels, and written in pencil on the back of an old shopping list. "My dear Klaus, your father and I thank God you are alive. We heard nothing for 40 days. I thought you were dead. The Americans came to our building yesterday. They were polite. They gave us food. Your father wept. I have never seen him weep before. The city is destroyed. There is no work, no food, no future. But you are alive. That is the only thing that matters. Be good. Come home when you can. Your mother." Klaus read the letter 17 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it under his pillow. That night, Franz asked, "Did you get a letter?" "Yes." "Me too." Franz was crying. "My family is alive. All of them. They're in Hamburg." Around the barracks, other boys were reading letters, crying, some laughing with relief. For the first time since the war ended, they had proof that something existed beyond the wire. On June 28th, they were informed that boys under 16 would be released within 2 weeks, sent to displaced persons camps, or reunited with families if possible. Boys 16 and 17 would remain in custody for an additional 60 days, pending review. Klaus was 15. He was going home. The night before his release, he couldn't sleep. He lay on his cot and thought about what waited for him. Berlin in ruins. His father crippled. His mother starving. A future built on the ashes of everything he'd believed. Franz, from the next cot, whispered, "Are you scared?" "Yes." "Me too." Pause. "Do you think we're bad people?" Klaus thought about Peter Vogel, the boy he'd hit in 1940. He thought about the photographs from Dachau. He thought about the Panzerfaust he'd almost fired at American soldiers who'd ended up giving him chocolate. "I think we did bad things," Klaus said slowly. "But maybe we can do better things now." "How?" "I don't know. But we have to try." On July 2, 1945, Klaus Becker walked through the gates of Rhine Prisoner of War Enclosure No. 4, carrying a bag with his belongings. One change of clothes, his mother's letter, and a chocolate bar Sergeant Walker had given him that morning. "Stay good, kid," Walker had said. "Don't let them make you into something you're not." Klaus had nodded, unable to speak, past the lump in his throat. The truck that would take him to the displaced persons camp waited outside the gate. 12 other boys were already inside. Franz was there. Dieter was there. Martin was there. Otto was not. Otto had chosen to stay with the older boys, still believing that someday, somehow, the Reich would return. As the truck pulled away, Klaus looked back at the camp, at the guards who'd fed him, at the tents that had sheltered him, at the place where he'd learned that mercy was real and that monsters wore uniforms he recognized. The road ahead was broken. Germany was broken. Klaus was broken. But broken things could be rebuilt, and maybe, just maybe, the foundation could be something better this time. Sergeant Walker stood at the gate watching them go. He raised one hand in farewell. Klaus raised his in return. In the back of the truck, Dieter was crying again. Klaus put an arm around him. "It's going to be okay," Klaus said. He didn't know if it was true, but he knew that even in hunger and darkness, even in the ruins of everything, they'd believed, there were still hearts that whispered hope. There were still men who chose mercy over revenge. There were still moments when the monsters turned out to be human, and the humans turned out to be capable of grace. Klaus held on to that as the truck carried them toward whatever came next. The displaced persons camp at Lehrter Station sat in the skeleton of what used to be Berlin's central railway terminal. The roof was gone. The platforms were cracked. But the Red Cross had set up tents, medical stations, and a processing center for refugees trying to find their families. Klaus arrived there on July 4, 1945, with Franz and 11 other boys, all carrying paper documents that declared them discharged POWs under 16 non-combatant status. A Red Cross volunteer, a German woman named Frau Kessler with gray hair and tired eyes, checked his papers. Klaus Becker, born April 1930. Father Werner Becker, mother Hannelore Becker. Last known address Kreuzberg District, Oranienstrasse 47. "Is it still standing?" Klaus asked. Frau Kessler consulted a list. "The building is damaged but habitable. Your parents registered with us 3 weeks ago. They're alive." Klaus's knees went weak. "Can I go to them?" "Tomorrow. It's after curfew. You'll stay here tonight, leave at first light." That night, Klaus lay on a camp cot surrounded by hundreds of displaced people and couldn't sleep. His father was alive. His mother was alive. He would see them tomorrow. The thought terrified him more than the tank had. What would he tell them? How could he explain what he'd believed, what he'd almost done? How could he face his father who'd told him to run after Klaus had stayed and fought? Franz in the next cot whispered, "Klaus?" "Yeah." "When you see your parents, are you going to tell them everything?" Klaus thought about it. "I don't know. Are you? I don't think I can." Franz's voice cracked. My mother, she'll look at me different. She'll know I hit someone. She'll know I believed all of it." "We were children," Klaus said, but the words felt hollow. "We were old enough to pull triggers." Neither of them slept that night. At dawn, Klaus walked through Berlin with a map drawn by Frau Kessler. The city was unrecognizable, entire neighborhoods erased. The streets were clogged with rubble refugees and Soviet soldiers smoking on street corners. American jeeps patrolled in pairs. The Reichstag was a burned shell. The Brandenburg Gate stood alone in a field of destruction. Klaus walked for 3 hours. His legs ached. His arm, still bandaged from the Panzerfaust burn, throbbed. When he reached Oranienstrasse, he stopped. His building was still standing. Barely. The eastern wall was collapsed, exposing the interior like a dollhouse. But the western apartments were intact windows covered with cardboard and canvas. Klaus climbed the stairs. Second floor. Third floor. The door to apartment 3B was painted red just like he remembered. He knocked. Footsteps. The door opened. His mother stood there, 42 years old, but looking 70. Her hair was mostly gray now. Her dress hung loose on a frame that had lost 20 kilograms, but her eyes, when they saw him, filled with something that made Klaus's throat close. "Klaus," she whispered. Then she pulled him inside and held him so tight he couldn't breathe. She was crying, saying his name over and over, and Klaus just stood there, arms at his sides, unable to move. His father appeared from the kitchen, limping on his wooden leg, and stopped. Werner Becker looked at his son for a long moment. Then he nodded once. "You survived," Werner said. "Yes." "Good." Werner turned back to the kitchen. "Your mother made soup. It's not much, but it's hot." They sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Klaus had eaten breakfast on April 12th before reporting for conscription. The soup was thin, mostly water and cabbage, but it was warm. His mother couldn't stop touching him. His hand, his shoulder, his face, like she needed proof he was real. "They told us the Americans were executing prisoners," she said. "They said anyone captured would be killed or sent to work camps in Siberia. When you didn't come back, I thought—" Her voice broke. "The Americans fed me," Klaus said quietly. "They gave me medicine. They taught me English." His father looked up from his soup. "English?" "A little. One of the guards, Sergeant Walker, he was kind to me." Klaus stirred his soup. "They weren't what we were told." His mother's hand tightened on his. "No one was what we were told." That night, Klaus lay in his old bed, in his old room, and stared at the ceiling. The wall was cracked. You could see into the next apartment where the Rosenfelds used to live. They'd been gone since 1943. Klaus had never asked where. Now he knew. The next morning, July 6th. Klaus walked to what remained of Alexanderplatz. The building where he'd first met Zimmermann was a pile of rubble. The streets were full of people trying to rebuild, trying to survive. Soviet soldiers directed traffic. American jeeps distributed food from the back of trucks. Klaus stood in line for ration cards. Behind him, an old man was talking to a woman in a headscarf. "They arrested Hauptmann Gruber yesterday," the man said. "The Americans. They're rounding up all the SS, all the Hitler Youth leaders." "Good," the woman said. "They should hang them all." Klaus's stomach turned. He moved forward in line, got his ration card, and walked away quickly. On July 10th, Franz found him. Franz's family had made it to Berlin from Hamburg looking for relatives. They met at a soup kitchen run by the Red Cross on Friedrichstrasse. "Did you hear about Zimmermann?" Franz asked. Klaus's blood went cold. "No." "British arrested him 3 days ago. They found him hiding in a basement in Wedding District. They're holding him for trial." "Trial for what?" Franz looked at him like he was stupid. "For what he did to us. For training children. For war crimes." Klaus thought about Zimmermann making him run until he vomited. Thought about Peter Vogel being beaten by 12 boys while Zimmermann watched. Thought about the propaganda, the lies, the systematic destruction of their ability to think. Good, Klaus said. But it didn't feel good. It felt complicated. 2 days later, Klaus was walking past a makeshift cinema set up by the British Army when he saw a crowd gathering. A sign outside read, "Compulsory viewing, all German citizens." A British soldier was checking papers letting people in. Klaus showed his ID. "How old are you?" the soldier asked in careful German. 15. The soldier hesitated. It's difficult to watch." "I'll watch anyway." Inside, maybe 200 people sat on benches facing a white screen. British soldiers stood at the exits. The lights went down. The film had no title card. It just started. Bergen-Belsen, Dachau, Buchenwald. Footage shot by Allied cameramen in April and May 1945. Piles of bodies. Living skeletons in striped uniforms. Mass graves being filled by bulldozers. Children with hollow eyes. Gas chambers. Crematoriums. A British narrator spoke in German. "This is what was done in your name. This is what your government created. This is what you allowed to happen." Klaus watched a man dig through a pile of corpses looking for his daughter. Watched British soldiers force SS guards to bury the dead with their bare hands. Watched a woman who weighed maybe 35 kilograms try to stand and collapse. Around him, people were crying. Some had left. Some were being sick into buckets provided by the British. Klaus just sat there frozen, unable to look away. When it ended and the lights came on, an old man stood up and shouted, "Lies, American lies!" A British officer walked over. "You think this is fake?" "Yes." "Then come with me. I'll take you to Bergen-Belsen myself. You can smell it, you can see it. You can tell the survivors they're lying to their faces." The old man sat down. Klaus walked out into the July sunlight and vomited in an alley. His hands were shaking. His vision was blurred. He slid down a wall and sat in the dirt, trying to breathe. A voice said, "Klaus." He looked up. Peter Vogel stood there. Peter, who Klaus had hit in 1940. Peter, who'd been beaten by 12 boys for forgetting song lyrics. Peter was 17 now, thin with a scar on his cheek Klaus didn't remember. "Peter?" Klaus whispered. "I just watched the film," Peter said. His voice was flat, emotionless. "Did you?" Klaus nodded. Peter sat down next to him. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Peter said, "I joined in 1938. I was 8. My father made me. He said it was our duty." He laughed, but there was no humor in it. Duty. That's what they called it. Duty to beat other children. Duty to hate. Duty to believe. "Peter, I'm sorry. For hitting you, don't." Peter's voice was sharp. "Don't apologize. We all did it. We all believed. Apologizing doesn't change anything." "Then what does—" Peter looked at him. "I don't know, but we have to figure it out. Because if we don't, if we just say we were following orders, or we were children, then we're no different than them." Klaus thought about Zimmerman, about Hitler, about all the people who'd created the machine that turned children into weapons. "We are different," Klaus said. "We stopped." Did we? Or were we just stopped? Klaus didn't have an answer. On July 19th, Klaus went to the British detention center at Spandau Citadel. He told the guard he wanted to see Erich Zimmerman. The guard, a corporal from Manchester, looked at him suspiciously. "Why? He was my instructor. I need to talk to him." "You need closure." Klaus didn't know that word. "I need to understand." The guard made a phone call. 20 minutes later, Klaus was sitting in a concrete room across a table from Zimmerman. Zimmerman looked smaller. He was in a gray prison uniform, no longer wearing his brown Hitler Youth uniform. His missing fingers made his left hand look like a broken tool. When he saw Klaus, he smiled. "Becker, you survived the war." "Yes, sir. The "sir" came automatically. "Don't call me that. I'm a prisoner now. You're free." Zimmerman leaned back. "Why are you here?" "I want to know why." "Why what?" "Why you did it. Why you made us hit Peter Vogel. Why you lied to us. Why you taught us to hate." Zimmerman studied him. "Because I was told to." "That's not an answer." "It's the only answer." Zimmerman's voice was tired. "I was 19 when I joined. I believed everything they told me. By the time I realized it was wrong, I was too deep. If I stopped, if I questioned, they'd send me to the front. Or worse." He held up his damaged hand. "This happened during training. I was deemed unfit for combat. So they gave me you, 12-year-olds to mold. I did what I was ordered to do. You enjoyed it. Sometimes." Zimmerman's honesty was jarring. "Power feels good when you have none. I had no power over my life, so I took power over yours. That doesn't make it right. It makes me a coward." Klaus stared at him. "They're going to execute you." "Probably." Zimmerman shrugged. "Do you think they should—" Klaus thought about Peter's beaten face. Thought about Dieter, 12 years old, crying in a foxhole. Thought about the photographs from Dachau. "Yes," Klaus said. Zimmerman nodded. "Good. At least you learned to think." He leaned forward. "When they ask you about me at the trial, tell the truth. All of it. Don't protect me. Don't lie. Tell them exactly what I did. Because if you don't, if you lie to protect a monster, then I destroyed you after all." Klaus left the detention center and didn't look back. On August 2nd, 1945, Klaus started work. The city needed laborers to clear rubble, and boys his age were being hired for basic wages. 3 Reichsmarks a day paid in occupation currency. Klaus joined a crew of 18 men and boys clearing a collapsed apartment building on Linienstrasse. The foreman, a man named Herr Dietrich, who'd lost his son at Stalingrad, was fair, but strict. No stealing, no fighting, no talking politics. We work, we get paid, we go home. Understood. They understood. Klaus worked 10 hours a day, hauling bricks, sorting rubble, searching for anything salvageable. His hands blistered, then calloused. His muscles ached. But the work was honest, and honest work felt like redemption. On his crew was a man named Stefan, maybe 35, who'd been Wehrmacht infantry. Stefan had been at Normandy, captured by Americans on June 8, 1944, and spent 13 months in a POW camp in Oklahoma. "Oklahoma," Stefan said during lunch break. "Middle of nowhere, hot as hell. But the Americans, they treated us well. Fed us. Let us work on farms. Paid us in scrip we could use at the camp store." He bit into his bread. "Better than I treated French POWs in 41. "What did you do to them?" Klaus asked. Stefan looked at him. "Things I'm not proud of." "Are you sorry?" "Every day." Stefan wrapped up his remaining food. "But being sorry doesn't bring them back, doesn't undo what I did. So I work, I rebuild, I try to be better." He stood. "That's all any of us can do." On August 15th, Klaus received a letter from Sergeant Walker. It had been forwarded through the Red Cross, postmarked Chicago, Illinois, USA, dated July 28th. "Dear Klaus, I hope this letter finds you well. I am back home with my family. My son asked me what the war was like. I told him about the cities we liberated, the people we helped, and the children we saved. I told him about you. You asked me once why I helped. I want you to understand something. You were not the enemy. You were a victim. The enemy was the ideology that put a weapon in your hands. The enemy was the system that taught you to hate. You have a chance now that many don't. You can choose who you become. You can choose to be better than what they tried to make you. I believe you will make the right choices. Stay good. James Walker." Klaus read the letter sitting on his bed while his mother made dinner in the kitchen. He read it 3 times. Then he folded it carefully and put it in the box with his discharge papers. On September 1st, Klaus testified at Zimmermann's trial. British military tribunal, 3 judges, a prosecutor, who spoke perfect German. Klaus told them everything. The beatings, the propaganda, the training, the lies. He didn't protect Zimmermann. He didn't soften the truth. When he finished, the lead judge asked, "Do you hate Herr Zimmermann?" Klaus thought about it. "No, sir, I pity him." Why? Because he was a coward who chose cruelty over courage, and now he'll die knowing that. Zimmermann was sentenced to death by hanging. The sentence was carried out on October 3, 1945. Klaus didn't attend. On October 12th, Klaus started school again. The British had reopened a gymnasium on Schönhauser Allee for children aged 12 to 17. The curriculum was different now. No racial science, no Hitler, no militarism, just math, science, literature, history, and English. Klaus's English teacher was a German woman named Frau Hoffmann, who'd lived in London before the war. She was patient, encouraging, and refused to let students give up. "English is the language of the future," she said. "If you want to rebuild Germany, you need to speak to the world. And the world speaks English now." Klaus threw himself into it. He was good with languages, and English gave him something to focus on besides guilt. By December, he could read simple books. By March 1946, he could hold conversations. By June, he was dreaming in English. On his 16th birthday, April 14, 1946, Klaus sat with his father on their apartment balcony, watching Berlin slowly rebuild. Construction crews everywhere, new buildings rising from rubble, American, British, French, and Soviet flags hanging from different sectors. "What do you want to do?" his father asked. Klaus had been thinking about that for months. "I want to leave Germany." His father nodded slowly. "Where?" "America, England, anywhere that isn't here." "Running away?" "No." Klaus looked at his father. "Running toward something better." Werner Becker was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your mother and I, we can't leave. We're too old, too tired, too broken. But you're young. You can start over." He gripped his cane. "Promise me something." "What?" "Promise me you'll be better than we were, better than I was. I believed the lies too. I worked in that factory building machines that killed people, and I told myself I had no choice. But I did have a choice. I just didn't have the courage to make it." His voice cracked. "Don't be like me. Be brave." Klaus promised. On September 4, 1946, Klaus applied for immigration to the United States under the Displaced Persons Act. The process would take years. He needed sponsors' documents, proof of employment, proof of education, and a clean political record. He worked, he studied, he saved money. He learned English until he spoke it without an accent. He wrote letters to American churches, to relief organizations, to anyone who might sponsor him. In 1949, 3 years and 42 rejection letters later, a Methodist church in Iowa agreed to sponsor him. Klaus Becker, 19 years old, boarded a ship at Bremerhaven on August 12, 1949, and sailed to New York. He never saw Zimmermann's execution. He never forgot Peter Vogel's face. He never stopped having nightmares about the Panzerfaust and the tank and the moment he almost killed someone. But he also never forgot Sergeant Walker's chocolate, or the clean bandage on his burned arm, or the choice to be better than the machine had tried to make him. In the camps built to silence truth in the prisons, meant to crush hope in the ruins of an empire built on lies, something survived. Not innocence. That was gone. But humanity. The stubborn, resilient, impossible humanity that whispered through barbed wire fences and across enemy lines, that mercy was stronger than hate, that kindness could outlast cruelty, that even in the darkest night, someone somewhere was choosing to be human. And that choice, Klaus learned, was the only choice that mattered. The ship that carried Klaus to America was called the SS General R.M. Blatchford, a former troop transport converted for civilian use. It left Bremerhaven on August 12, 1949, carrying 847 displaced persons, most of them German, Polish, and Baltic refugees, trying to start over. Klaus shared a cabin with 5 other men in their 20s, all sponsored by churches, all running from something they couldn't name. The crossing took 9 days. Klaus spent most of it on deck watching the ocean, trying not to think about what waited on the other side. America, the land of his former enemies, the country that had shown him mercy when his own had shown him nothing but lies. On the 3rd day out, a man approached him at the rail. Maybe 45 thin, with a number tattooed on his left forearm that Klaus recognized from the photographs at Dachau. "You're German," the man said in German. Klaus nodded, tensing. "Wehrmacht or SS?" "Neither. Volkssturm. I was 15. The man studied him. 15. Still young enough to lie to yourself that you didn't know. I didn't know about the camps, not until after. But you knew about the hate. You knew Jews were being taken away. You knew we weren't considered human." The man's voice wasn't angry, it was tired. Everyone knew something. They just didn't want to know everything. Klaus couldn't argue. "I'm sorry." "Sorry doesn't bring back my wife, my daughter." The man turned back to the ocean. "But you're here. You survived. So live well. Live better than the ones who killed them. That's the only apology that matters." The man walked away. Klaus never learned his name. They arrived at New York Harbor on August 21, 1949. The Statue of Liberty emerged from morning fog like a promise Klaus wasn't sure he deserved. The processing at Ellis Island took 6 hours. Papers, medical checks, interviews with immigration officials who asked if he'd ever been a member of the Nazi Party. "Hitler Youth," Klaus said. "Compulsory from age 10. The official, a Jewish man named Goldstein, looked at him over his glasses. "You fight?" "I was conscripted in April 1945. I surrendered to Americans without firing a shot." Goldstein stamped his papers. "Welcome to America, Mr. Becker. Try to be better than where you came from." "I will, sir." The Methodist Church in Waterloo, Iowa, had arranged housing for Klaus in a boarding house on Commercial Street, run by a widow named Mrs. Henderson. The room cost $8 a week, which seemed impossible, until Klaus converted it to Reichsmarks and realized it was less than he'd paid for a loaf of bread in 1946. Mrs. Henderson was 63. Her husband killed at Guadalcanal in 1943. When she learned Klaus was German, her face hardened. "My Tom died fighting your people," she said. "Yes, ma'am. I'm sorry." "Are you Wehrmacht?" "I was a child soldier. Volkssturm. I was 15. I surrendered to American forces in May 1945. She looked at him for a long moment. "You look like my nephew. He's 17. She handed him a key. "Rooms on the 2nd floor. Breakfast at 7. No drinking, no women, no trouble. Church on Sunday if you want a ride." "Thank you, ma'am." She nodded. "Tom would want me to give you a chance, so I'm giving you one. Don't waste it." Klaus started work on August 29, 1949, at a meatpacking plant on the Cedar River. John Morell and Company, employing 400 workers, processing 3,000 hogs daily. Klaus was assigned to the loading dock, moving crates, for 65 cents an hour, 48 hours a week. The foreman, a man named Chuck Morrison, who'd been Army Air Corps in England, took one look at Klaus's papers and said, "Germany, huh?" "Yes, sir." "You Nazi." "I was Hitler Youth. They made us join." Morrison spat tobacco juice. "How old were you?" 10 when I joined, 15 when I fought." "Fight us or the Russians?" "You." "I surrendered. Americans treated me well." Morrison considered this. "Work hard, don't cause trouble, and we'll get along fine. But if any of the boys give you grief about being German, don't be surprised. A lot of them lost brothers over there." They gave him grief. The first week, someone wrote Kraut on his locker. The second week, a man named Eddie Kowalski, whose brother died at Bastogne, cornered him in the break room. "You kill any Americans?" Eddie asked. "No, I surrendered before I could." "Good, because if you had, I'd beat the hell out of you right here." Klaus nodded. "I understand." Eddie stared at him, then walked away. On September 15th, Klaus met Sarah Levy. She worked at the public library on East 4th Street, and Klaus went there twice a week to practice English by reading newspapers. Sarah was 26, dark hair, dark eyes, and a way of watching people that made Klaus feel transparent. He was reading about the Berlin airlift when she approached his table. "You're Klaus Becker," she said. He looked up startled. "How do you know my name? Mrs. Henderson from church mentioned you. Said you're from Germany." "Yes." "What part?" "Berlin." Sarah pulled out a chair and sat down without being invited. "What was it like?" Klaus chose his words carefully. "Destroyed. When I left, half the city was rubble. Soviet sector was worse than American sector. Everyone was starving." "Were you Wehrmacht?" Klaus had answered this question 17 times since arriving in America. "I was conscripted into Volkssturm at 15. I surrendered to Americans in May 1945. I spent 2 months in a prisoner of war camp. They treated me well." "Did you know about the camps?" Klaus's throat tightened. "Not during the war. After. The Americans showed us films, photographs. I was in a cinema in Berlin in July 1945 when they showed Bergen-Belsen footage. I didn't know, but I should have known." Sarah was quiet for a moment. "My parents were Polish. They died in Treblinka in 1943. I was here already, came in 1938 with my aunt. I was 15 when I got the letter from the Red Cross saying they were gone." Klaus felt like he'd been punched. "I'm sorry. Why, you didn't kill them." "My country did." "Your country was a machine. You were fed into it like everyone else." Sarah stood up. "But you got out. So now you have a choice about what you do next. Most people don't get that choice." She walked away. Klaus sat there staring at the newspaper, not seeing the words. The nightmares started in October. Klaus would dream of the Panzerfaust of the tank of his finger on the trigger. But in the dreams, he fired. The rocket hit. The tank exploded. And when the smoke cleared, Sergeant Walker was burning inside it, screaming. He'd wake up gasping, soaked in sweat. Mrs. Henderson knocking on his door, asking if he was all right. "I'm fine." He'd lie, but he wasn't fine. On October 23rd, Klaus attended a lecture at the public library. A woman named Ruth Kluger, a Holocaust survivor, was speaking about her experiences at Theresienstadt, Auschwitz, and Christianstadt. Sarah had mentioned it said Klaus should go. He almost didn't. He almost stayed in his room. But something Sarah had said stuck with him. "You have a choice about what you do next." He went. The library's community room held maybe 60 people. Ruth Kluger was 53, gray-haired, with eyes that had seen things Klaus couldn't imagine. She spoke in accented English, calm and direct. "I was deported in 1942. I was 11 years old. My father was already dead. My mother and I were sent to Theresienstadt, from there Auschwitz. My mother was selected for the gas chamber immediately. I survived because I lied about my age, said I was 15, old enough to work." Klaus sat in the back row, unable to move. "I spent 2 years in labor camps. Christianstadt was an ammunition factory. We worked 12-hour shifts 6 days a week assembling fuses for artillery shells. The guards were German women civilians, some as young as 18. They weren't monsters. They were ordinary people who'd been taught that we weren't human." She described the march in January 1945 when the camp was evacuated ahead of the Soviet advance. "They marched us west in the snow. No food, no shelter. Women who couldn't keep up were shot. The guards didn't enjoy it. They just did it. Because that's what the system taught them to do." Klaus's hands were shaking. "I survived because a German guard, a woman named Helga, gave me her bread one night. She didn't have to. She could have been punished, but she did it anyway. And because of her, I lived long enough to be liberated by Americans near Leipzig in April 1945. After the lecture, people asked questions. One man asked how she could forgive. Ruth laughed, but there was no humor in it. Forgive, I don't forgive the system. I don't forgive the ideology, but the individuals. Some of them were monsters. Most were just people who made terrible choices because choosing differently felt impossible. She looked around the room. The important thing is that we learn. That we teach our children to recognize when they're being fed into a machine that destroys humanity. Klaus raised his hand before he could stop himself. Ruth looked at him. Yes. I was Hitler Youth, Klaus said. His voice cracked. I believed the lies. I was taught to hate. I almost killed American soldiers because I thought they were monsters. And then, they gave me water. They gave me food. They showed me mercy I didn't deserve. The room went silent. What do I do with that? Klaus asked. How do I live with what I believed, what I almost did? Ruth studied him. How old were you when you joined Hitler Youth? 10. And when you surrendered, 15. Then you were a child fed into the machine. What you do now is simple. You refuse to feed anyone else into it. You become the guard who shares her bread. You become the person who chooses mercy over hate. She paused. That's how you live with it. By living better. Klaus couldn't speak. He nodded, blinking back tears. After the lecture, Sarah found him outside, sitting on the library steps. You spoke up, she said. I had to. Sarah sat next to him. My parents probably worked with Hitler Youth members. They ran a bakery in Warsaw. They sold bread to German soldiers, to Hitler Youth groups on camping trips. They smiled and served them because that's what survival required. Klaus looked at her. Weren't you angry at me when you found out? I was, for about 10 minutes. She pulled her coat tighter against the November cold. Then I realized you were 15 when the war ended. Same age I was when my parents died. We were both children when adults destroyed the world. Being angry at you doesn't bring them back. What does? Nothing. Sarah's voice was quiet. They're gone, but I'm here. You're here. And we get to choose what we build next. On November 17, 1949, Klaus received a letter forwarded through Mrs. Henderson. The return address was Chicago, Illinois. His hands shook as he opened it. Dear Klaus, I hope this letter finds you well. A friend at the Red Cross helped me track your address. I heard you made it to America. I'm proud of you. I'm still in Chicago working for the post office now that I'm out of the Army. My son is 13. He's a good kid. Smart. I told him about you. He wants to write to you. Practice his penmanship. Would that be all right? There's something I never told you in Berlin. When I saw you with that Panzerfaust, I thought I was going to have to shoot you. You were 15 scared, and I knew if you fired, I'd have to kill you. When you surrendered. Instead, I went back to my tent and cried. I cried because for once, I didn't have to kill a child. You saved my life too, Klaus, by choosing to surrender, by choosing to live. Keep making good choices. Your friend James Walker. Klaus read the letter 4 times, then carefully folded it and put it in his box with his discharge papers and his mother's old letter from 1945. On December 24, 1949, Klaus attended Christmas Eve service at First Methodist Church with Mrs. Henderson. The sanctuary was warm, decorated with candles and pine boughs. The pastor spoke about redemption, about second chances, about the light that shines in darkness. Klaus sat in the pew and thought about Sergeant Walker's chocolate, about the guard who gave Ruth Kluger bread, about Sarah choosing not to hate him, about Mrs. Henderson giving him a room despite her dead husband. Mercy. All of it came down to mercy. The choice to be human when the machine demanded you be a monster. After the service, Sarah found him in the fellowship hall, drinking weak coffee and eating sugar cookies. "I'm going to New York in February," she said. "There's a program helping Jewish refugees settle. They need translators. I speak Polish, Yiddish, and English." "That's good work," Klaus said. "Come with me." Klaus stared at her. "What? Come with me? You speak German, English, some Polish? They need people like you. People who understand what it's like to survive something that tried to destroy you." "Sarah, I'm not Jewish. I was Hitler Youth. They won't want me. They need good people. And you're trying to be good. That's more than most." She finished her coffee. "Think about it." Klaus thought about it for 3 weeks. Then, on January 15, 1950, he gave Mrs. Henderson notice. On February 3rd, he and Sarah took a train to New York City. The Refugee Resettlement Office was in a converted warehouse on Delancey Street, run by a Jewish relief organization called HIS. The director, a man named Abraham Cohn, who'd survived Mauthausen, interviewed Klaus in a small office that smelled of coffee and old paper. "You were Hitler Youth," Cohn said, reading Klaus's file. "Yes, sir. Compulsory from age 10. You fought for Germany. For 3 weeks. I surrendered to Americans without firing a shot." Cohn looked at him. "Why do you want to work here?" Klaus chose his words carefully. "Because I need to do something good. I spent 5 years being taught to hate. I need to spend the rest of my life learning to help. This won't erase what you believed. I know, sir, but maybe it will build something better." Cohn hired him on February 10, 1950. Klaus's job was simple: greet refugees, help them navigate paperwork, translate when needed, and show them that America could be a home. Most of the refugees were Jews from displaced persons camps finally allowed to emigrate after years of waiting. Klaus met families who'd lost everything, children who'd never known peace, adults who looked at him and saw the uniform he used to wear. He didn't hide it. When they asked, he told them, "I was Hitler Youth. I believed the lies. I'm sorry. And I'm trying to do better." Some spit at him. Some refused his help. But some, like Ruth Kluger, had saw a child who'd been fed into a machine and had managed to crawl out alive. On April 14, 1950, Klaus's 21st birthday, Sarah took him to dinner at a kosher deli on Essex Street. They ate pastrami sandwiches and pickles, and Sarah told him about her parents' bakery in Warsaw, about the bread they used to make, about the life that had been stolen. "Do you still have nightmares?" she asked. "Every night," Klaus admitted. "I dream I fired the Panzerfaust. I dream the Americans died because I was too much of a coward to surrender earlier. I dream I became what they tried to make me. But you didn't." "No, but I almost did." Sarah reached across the table and took his hand. "Almost doesn't count. What counts is what you chose when it mattered." Klaus held her hand and realized something that had been building for months. He was falling in love with a Jewish woman whose parents his country had murdered. The irony was so sharp it cut. "Sarah," he said slowly, "your parents—" "I know." She squeezed his hand. "I know what you're going to say. That you don't deserve this. That it's wrong. That you carry too much." "Don't I?" "We all carry too much." Sarah's eyes were wet. "But at some point we have to set it down. Not forget it. Not pretend it didn't happen. But stop letting it crush us." Klaus didn't know how to do that. But with Sarah's hand in his in a kosher deli in New York City, 5 years and 11 months after surrendering to Sergeant Walker, he thought maybe he could learn. Freedom had come to him in the form of a black soldier with a canteen. It had come in clean bandages and chocolate bars. It had come in the choice not to pull a trigger. And now it was coming in a borrowed life in a country that wasn't his, trying to help people his country had tried to destroy. The war had ended in 1945. But the reckoning would last the rest of his life. That was the price of survival. That was the weight of being human in a world that had tried so hard to teach him not to be. But he was human. And every day, in small ways, he chose to prove it. in translations and paperwork, and acts of service so minor they barely registered. In the slow, painful work of building something better from the ruins of everything that had been. Freedom had arrived. But it came too late for millions who'd vanished into smoke and snow and silence. Klaus lived for them now, for the ones who didn't get chocolate or mercy or second chances. He lived, and he tried to be worthy of the breath he still drew. And some days, that was enough. On June 15, 1950, Klaus received a telegram from Berlin. His mother had written through the Red Cross emergency system the only way to reach him quickly. The message was 9 words: "Father dying, stop, pneumonia, stop, come if you can stop." Klaus stared at the telegram in the Hayes office, his hands numb. Sarah found him there standing by the window, not moving. "What happened?" "My father. He's dying." Sarah read the telegram. "Can you go?" "I don't know. I'd need papers permission to re-enter if I leave America money for passage." Klaus's voice was flat. "It would take weeks." "Then start now." Klaus started. He filed paperwork with immigration explaining the emergency. He withdrew his savings, $340 earned over 9 months at Hayes. He wrote to Mrs. Henderson, to his supervisor at the meatpacking plant, to everyone who'd helped him build a life in America. On July 2nd, he received approval. Temporary travel authorization valid for 60 days. He booked passage on a freighter leaving July 8th from New York to Hamburg, 8 days crossing. The night before he left, Sarah came to his apartment on Orchard Street. She brought soup from the deli bread and something wrapped in brown paper. "Open it," she said. Inside was a small leather journal, blank pages, and a fountain pen. "Write it down," Sarah said. "Everything you see, everything you feel. The truth doesn't survive unless someone writes it down." Klaus held the journal. "What if I can't?" "You can. You already did once when you testified against Zimmerman. You told the truth then. Keep telling it." They spent the night talking, not sleeping. Sarah told him about her plan to start a program documenting survivor testimonies, recording stories before the people who lived them died. Klaus told her about the nightmares about Sergeant Walker's letters, about the weight of being the boy who almost killed, and the man trying to heal. At dawn, Sarah walked him to the pier. The freighter sat low in the water cargo, already loaded crew preparing to cast off. "Come back," Sarah said. "I will." "Promise me." Klaus kissed her. "I promise." The crossing was rough. July storms in the North Atlantic. Klaus spent most of it in his bunk, writing in the journal Sarah had given him. He wrote about Berlin, about Zimmerman, about the Panzerfaust and the tank. He wrote about the chocolate and the water and the moment he learned that mercy was real. He wrote about his father telling him to run, and how Klaus hadn't run until it was almost too late. They arrived in Hamburg on July 16, 1950. The city was still rebuilding 5 years after the war. The port was functional but scarred. British and American flags flew from administration buildings. Klaus cleared customs, changed money, and took a train to Berlin. Berlin Hauptbahnhof was operational again, rebuilt from ruins. Klaus arrived at 2200 hours on July 17th, took a taxi through streets he barely recognized. The rubble was mostly cleared. New buildings rose between the old. Soviet sector checkpoints appeared at intersections. The city was divided now, carved up by the victors. His family's apartment on Oranienstrasse looked exactly the same. Klaus climbed the stairs, knocked on the door marked 3B. His mother answered. She'd aged a decade in 13 months. Her hair was completely white now. Her face was lined with exhaustion and grief. But when she saw Klaus, something flickered behind her eyes. "You came," she whispered. "I came." His father lay in the bedroom breathing shallow and wet. Werner Becker had lost more weight, his frame skeletal beneath the blankets. But his eyes were clear when Klaus entered. "Klaus," he said. His voice was a rasp. "I'm here, Papa." Werner reached out a shaking hand. Klaus took it, sat beside the bed. His father's grip was weak, the hand cold. "I don't have long," Werner said. "Hours, maybe. The doctors say my lungs are drowning." "Don't talk. Save your strength." "No." Werner's grip tightened slightly. "I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you years ago." Klaus waited. "I knew," Werner said. "About the camps. Not everything, not the scope. But I knew Jews were being taken away. I knew they weren't coming back. I worked at Borsig with a man named David Rosenfeld. He was an engineer, brilliant, taught me calculus when I was an apprentice." Werner coughed, blood flecking his lips. "They came for him in 1941, dragged him out of the factory in front of everyone. I stood there and watched. I did nothing." Klaus's throat tightened. "I told myself I had no choice, that if I spoke up they'd take me too. Take you. Take your mother." Werner's eyes were wet. "But that was a lie. I had a choice. I chose to be a coward. I chose to survive." He looked at Klaus. "You were braver than me. When you testified against Zimmermann, you did what I couldn't. You told the truth." "Papa..." "No. Listen." Werner coughed again, harder. Klaus's mother appeared with a cloth, wiped the blood. "You're young. You have time. Don't waste it like I did. Don't let them make you silent. Don't let them convince you that survival is the same as living." Klaus held his father's hand and said nothing. Werner Becker died at 03:47 hours on July 18, 1950. His last words were to Klaus's mother, "I'm sorry." They buried him on July 20th in a cemetery in Prenzlauer Berg, one of the few that hadn't been completely destroyed during the war. 23 people attended. Neighbors, former co-workers, a few distant relatives. The pastor was young, new to the position after the previous one had been executed for hiding Jews in his church basement. At the graveside, Klaus's mother gripped his arm. "Your father loved you," she said. "He was so proud when he heard you'd gone to America. He told everyone. My son is in America, starting over, being brave." She wiped her eyes. "He wanted that for you. The courage he didn't have." After the funeral, Klaus walked through Berlin alone. He went to Alexanderplatz, where the Hitler Youth Assembly Hall had stood. It was a parking lot now. He went to the Oberbaum Bridge where he'd surrendered. The bridge was rebuilt, tramcars running again. He went to Kreuzberg, to the spot where Sergeant Walker had given him water. Nothing looked the same. Everything was different. But the memories remained sharp as broken glass. On July 23rd, Klaus visited the Soviet sector. He needed a special pass issued by American authorities allowing temporary crossing. The checkpoint at Friedrichstrasse was tense, Soviet soldiers checking papers with automatic rifles slung over their shoulders. Klaus was going to Ravensbrück, 90 kilometers north of Berlin. It had been a women's concentration camp opened in 1939, liberated by Soviets in April 1945. It was now a memorial site open to visitors maintained by the German Democratic Republic. He took a train, then a bus. The camp sat beside a lake, the water blue and peaceful. The juxtaposition was obscene. The gates were still standing. Iron with the inscription, Arbeit macht frei, removed but the frame remaining. Klaus walked through them and felt his stomach drop. Barracks. Punishment cells. The crematorium still standing, still smelling faintly of ash. A Soviet guide led a group of 40 people through, explaining in German and Russian what had happened here. 132,000 women had passed through these gates. 92,000 had died. Klaus stood in the punishment cell block, barely large enough for one person to stand. Women had been locked in here for days, sometimes weeks. No food, no water, no light. They died standing up. In the crematorium, someone had left flowers. Fresh ones, white roses. A note in German. "For my mother who died here January 1945. I will never forget." Klaus pulled out Sarah's journal and started writing. Not about the buildings or the statistics. About what it felt like to stand in a place built to destroy human beings, and realize that his uniform, his Hitler Youth training. His belief in the lies had made this possible. A woman approached him, maybe 60, thin, with a scarf covering gray hair. She spoke in Polish accented German. "You're writing?" Klaus nodded. "Good. Write it all. Write every detail. Because they're already saying it didn't happen. Already saying we're lying." "Who's saying that?" "The ones who want to forget. The ones who want to bring it back." She looked at the crematorium. "I was here. Ravensbrück, then Auschwitz. I survived because I was 17 and strong enough to work. My mother, my sister, my aunt, they were selected the first day." She turned to Klaus. "How old are you?" 21. "You're German." "Yes." "Wehrmacht." "Volkssturm." "I was 15. I surrendered to Americans." The woman studied him. "And now you're here, writing in that book. Why?" Klaus chose his words carefully. "Because I need to remember what I almost became, what my country did, so I never let it happen again." The woman nodded slowly. "Good. Then write this. My name is Helena Kowalski. I was prisoner number 7294. I survived because a Polish guard named Anna smuggled me bread once a week for 6 months. Anna was executed in March 1945 for theft of camp supplies. She died so I could live. That's what I want people to remember. Not just the evil, the goodness that survived despite it." Klaus wrote it down, word for word. Helena watched him write, then walked away without another word. On July 29th, Klaus returned to West Berlin. He had 1 week left on his visa before he needed to board a ship back to America. He spent it visiting places he'd almost forgotten. The ruins of his old school. The factory where his father had worked, now demolished. The park where he'd played as a child before the war, now rebuilt with new trees and new playgrounds. On August 1st, Franz found him. Klaus was sitting in a cafe on Kurfürstendamm when Franz walked in, older now 21, wearing a suit and carrying a briefcase. "Klaus Becker," Franz said, grinning. "Someone told me you were back in Berlin." They embraced. Franz looked good, healthy, alive. "You made it to America," Franz said. "Iowa first, now New York. You too. Hamburg. I'm studying law at the university. I want to be a prosecutor." Franz's smile faded. "I want to make sure people like Zimmerman face justice." They talked for 3 hours. Franz told him about the trials still ongoing about Nazi officials being hunted down, about the slow process of justice. Klaus told him about Sarah, about Hayes, about the refugees he helped settle. "Do you still have nightmares?" Franz asked. "Every night." "Me too. I dream about the bridge, about the tank, about being so close to dying." Franz stirred his coffee. "But I also dream about the water, about the American who gave it to me, about the moment I realized we'd been lied to." "That moment saved us," Klaus said. "No, that moment showed us we could be saved. We saved ourselves by choosing to believe it." On August 3rd, Klaus visited Peter Vogel. Peter was working as a mechanic in Tempelhof, rebuilding engines, living in a small apartment near the old airport. When he opened the door and saw Klaus, he didn't smile. "Klaus." "Peter, can I come in?" Peter hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was sparse. A bed, a table, a radio, tools everywhere. Peter made coffee in silence, then sat across from Klaus. "Why are you here?" Peter asked. "To apologize. For hitting you. For being part of what they did to you." Peter stared at his coffee. "You weren't the only one who hit me. You weren't even the hardest. That doesn't make it right." "No, it doesn't." Peter looked up. "But you were 10 years old. We all were. They made us into weapons and turned us on each other." He took a sip. "I'm angrier at Zimmerman than I am at you. He was hanged, October 1945. I know. I would have pulled the lever myself if they'd asked. Peter's voice was bitter. But it doesn't change what happened. It doesn't give me back the childhood they stole. Klaus nodded. I'm sorry. Stop saying that. Sorry doesn't fix anything. Peter stood, walked to the window. You want to do something useful? Don't apologize. Just live better. That's all any of us can do. Klaus left Peter's apartment and walked to the river. He sat on the bank of the Spree, where the Oberbaum Bridge stood rebuilt, and pulled out Sarah's journal. He wrote about Peter, about Franz, about Helena at Ravensbrück. He wrote about his father's confession and his mother's grief. He wrote about the gates and the crematorium and the flowers left by someone who would never forget. He wrote until his hand cramped, until the sun set over the divided city, until he'd filled 30 pages with truth. On August 5, 1950, Klaus boarded a train to Hamburg, then a ship to New York. His mother stood on the platform crying, holding a package wrapped in brown paper. Your father wanted you to have this, she said. Inside was Werner Becker's prosthetic leg, the wooden one he'd worn after losing his real leg at the Borsig factory. He said to remember what happens when machines use people instead of people using machines, his mother said. He said you'd understand. Klaus held the wooden leg heavy with symbolism and regret. I'll come back, he told his mother. When I can. I'll bring Sarah. You'll like her. Is she Jewish? Klaus hesitated. Yes. His mother closed her eyes, tears streaming. Good. Then maybe we didn't destroy everything after all. The crossing back to America took 9 days. Klaus spent them writing, filling Sarah's journal with everything he'd seen, everyone he'd talked to, every truth that refused to stay silent. When he ran out of pages, he bought a new journal from the ship's store and kept writing. He arrived in New York on August 17, 1950. Sarah was waiting at the pier, and when Klaus saw her, something inside him broke open. He dropped his bag and held her shaking, unable to speak. You came back, Sarah whispered. I promised. That night in Sarah's apartment on Rivington Street, Klaus read her everything he'd written, every word, every name, every truth. She listened in silence, and when he finished, she took the journals and held them like they were sacred. This is how we fight, she said. Not with guns, with memory, with refusing to let them erase what happened. Klaus and Sarah married on November 12, 1950, in a small ceremony at a synagogue on Eldridge Street. The rabbi who performed the ceremony was a survivor of Sobibor. He looked at Klaus during the ceremony and said, You come from a people who tried to destroy us. Now you marry one of us. This is Tikkun Olam, repair of the world. They started the documentation project in January 1951. Sarah handled interviewing survivors. Klaus handled translation, transcription, and preservation. They recorded 847 testimonies over the next decade. Jewish survivors, Roma survivors, political prisoners, homosexuals, disabled people, everyone the Reich had tried to erase. They also recorded testimonies from perpetrators, guards who'd worked in camps, bureaucrats who'd processed deportation orders, Hitler youth leaders who'd trained children to hate, not to excuse them, to understand how ordinary people became part of a machine that destroyed millions. In 1953, Klaus testified at the trial of Rudolf Höss, former commandant of Auschwitz, who'd been captured hiding under a false name in Denmark. Klaus's testimony wasn't about Höss. It was about the system that created men like Höss. I was taught that Jews were subhuman, Klaus testified. I was taught that mercy was weakness. I was taught that obedience was the highest virtue. By the time I was old enough to question these things, questioning them felt impossible. That's how the machine worked. It made ordinary evil feel normal. The prosecutor asked, Do you consider yourself guilty? Klaus thought about Peter Vogel's face, about his father's confession, about the crematorium at Ravensbrück. Yes, he said, not of murder, not of genocide, but of complicity, of believing, of not asking questions when questions were still possible. And how do you live with that? By making sure it's remembered, by making sure it never happens again, by choosing every day to be better than what they tried to make me. Hus was sentenced to death. He was hanged at Auschwitz on April 16, 1947, near Crematorium Wurz, where he'd supervised the murder of over 1 million people. Klaus didn't attend, but he wrote about it. He wrote about everything. In 1961, Klaus and Sarah had a daughter. They named her Helena Anna after the survivor at Ravensbrück and the guard who'd saved her. Helena grew up bilingual, speaking English and German, surrounded by books and testimony, and the constant reminder that memory was a form of resistance. When Helena was 7, she asked, "Daddy, why do you write so much?" Klaus knelt down to her level. "Because if we don't write it down, people will forget. And if they forget, it could happen again." What could happen again? People hurting each other because they were taught to hate. Helena thought about this. Then I'll write too, so they never forget. On May 8, 1975, 30 years after Germany's surrender, Klaus returned to Berlin for the last time. He was 46 years old. His mother had died 2 years earlier. Sarah came with him and Helena, now 14. They visited Ravensbrück together. The memorial had expanded. More documentation. More names. More flowers left by people who refused to forget. Klaus showed Helena the punishment cells, the crematorium, the lake that had witnessed everything. "This is where I learned what we're capable of," Klaus told his daughter. "The worst and the best, the cruelty and the courage, the evil and the mercy." Helena stood in the gates, reading the inscription that had been reinstalled not as original decoration, but as warning, "Arbeit macht frei." "It's a lie," Helena said. "Yes," Klaus said, "but it's a lie that millions believed, and that's why we remember, so no one believes it again." They built Ravensbrück with hatred. They built Auschwitz with cruelty. They built Dachau with the methodical destruction of human dignity. But these places were remembered with love. With flowers and journals and testimonies and the stubborn refusal of survivors and witnesses to let the truth die. Klaus Becker died on April 14, 2001, his 72nd birthday. He'd spent 56 years documenting, testifying, teaching, and remembering. His archive, maintained by Sarah and Helena, contained 4,993 recorded testimonies, 18,000 pages of translated documents, and 47 journals filled with his own handwritten accounts. At his funeral, Sergeant James Walker's son read a letter his father had written before dying in 1987. "Klaus Becker was a boy I almost had to kill. Instead, I gave him water, and he spent the rest of his life proving that mercy was stronger than hate. That's the best thing I ever did." The archive still exists at the Museum of Jewish Heritage in New York, in the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum in Washington, in schools and libraries, and anywhere people believe that memory is the last line of defense against forgetting. Because if we forget, it returns. Different uniforms, different slogans, different enemies, but the same machinery. The same process of teaching children to hate. The same transformation of ordinary people into weapons of mass cruelty. Klaus's final journal entry, written the night before he died, said this: "I was 15 when I learned that mercy was real. I am 72 now, and I am still learning what that means. But I know this: every act of kindness is an act of resistance. Every moment of choosing humanity over hate is a victory against the machine. We don't win by forgetting. We win by remembering, and then choosing better." If you believe their names must be carried forward, share this story, and write a name in the comments below. A name of someone who showed mercy, someone who chose humanity, someone who proved that even in the darkest night, a single candle of kindness can illuminate the way home.